How is a real estate investor managing her properties during the crisis? That's the topic for today's episode, and without further ado, let's dive in. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode. For those who are tuning in for the first time, this is your channel for real estate education. So the reason why I decided to create this episode is because a lot of you have been asking me questions all over about what's happening with my portfolio and what advice do I have to give you, some of you who are already managing a real estate portfolio, investing in a real estate portfolio, and what tips do I actually have to share with you in order to navigate through this entire situation. So without further ado, let's just dive straight into the board, right? So first things first, the number one thing that I did during the crisis as soon as I found out was to communicate. So let's just have this here, communication. And why is it important, right? Because you need to figure out what's going on. So the first thing I did was to call my tenants, was to reach out to my property managers and found out what was going on locally, right? As I mentioned multiple times in prior episodes, real estate is usually something that is local. Not every single state is affected the same way. Not every single county is affected the same way. So I needed to know what was going on and find out what I can do as a landlord in order to provide the best support as possible. So luckily, none of my tenants actually lost their job and rent is still flowing in the same way. Aside from that, some of my rentals are actually Section 8 tenants. So as you know, as long as you're abiding by their rules, the government is always paying on time. So my rents have not been affected as of yet. But I do know that this is a pandemic and that things could get out of hand. So I actually started thinking about how things could actually go wrong and what I can do as a landlord, as a real estate investor to protect my investment. So what I have thought of is the following, right? So let's assume in the worst case scenario, my tenants do lose their jobs, right? So we have here jobs, and then what should I do? What would you do, right? So the best solution that I can think of was, okay, same thing, going back to communication and try to understand what they can possibly do, right? So the first question I will actually ask them is to, let's say, try to understand, okay, so I understand you lost your job, but what is your financial situation right now? Do you have enough savings for a rainy day? And if you do, how long can you make it last? Will it make it better if we work out a payment plan, right? Because you have to understand, yes, it's a horrible situation that they lost their job and therefore they're trying to figure out what can they do financially so they don't wind up in the street and at the same time worry about feeding themselves and their families. But us as real estate investors, as landlords, we also have our own financial responsibilities to meet, which is to paying the mortgage and making sure that the property taxes are paid, making sure that our property managers are also paid, right? So one of the solutions is to actually work out a payment plan to see if your tenants can actually take care of that. So let's say, for example, that the rent is usually $900, right? And after I talk to one of my tenants, I try to figure out, okay, how much can you possibly afford? Will it help out if I reduce the rent and then we spread out the payments throughout the following couple of months, so to speak, right? So let's say, for example, we have April and then May and then June, right? So we have June here and then let's just do July and then August and so on, right? So let's say my tenant says, well, you know what? I can only afford to pay $400 for the first 3 months. So we do 400 here and then 400 here and then 400 in here, which that will leave you with a $500 difference because formerly I used to charge $900 and now it's $400 what they can pay. That means that every month $500 it's being sort of like owed to me, right? For a total of $1,500. So now what I will do is just to simply take this and spread it out throughout the remaining months. So all the way through July to August, we have a total of 6 more months, right? So we're talking about 6 more months from July all the way to December. Let's assume that by July, hopefully, things do get better and my tenant is able to find another job or maybe get additional side income, and we'll have the ability to resume normal rental payments, right? So we're talking about 900 and 900 and so on. So Part of the payment plan solutions is to simply take this $1,500, right? The $500 that they wind up not paying for, the first 3 months, April, May, and June, and distribute this debt all the way across the 6 months. So when we take this number and we divide that by 6, we're getting a total of $250. So this $250, we'll add it back up here, and that will be, in essence, what they will be paying out to me, right? So it's a payment plan. It definitely reduces some of the stress to them. And once this is figured out, then you sort of like sit down and you say, okay, so now we have the payment plan taken care of, right? So what else can you do to sort of like improve your situation or take care of what's going on, right? So part of what we do in this channel is to educate, right? So as a landlord myself, then what I will do is to also educate them as well as to what are their options, right? So one way is to sort of like point out to what kind of solutions can they do in the interim. And one of them is to actually apply for unemployment, right? And now I know the agencies have been swamped and trying to get unemployment is actually quite frustrating at this point, but if you keep trying, eventually you'll get through the agency. I have a couple of friends who have mentioned that as well. So just keep trying and things will eventually work out. Then another solution is to actually look for jobs, right? And I know it sounds kind of silly because you're thinking, well, this person just lost a job. How can you tell them to go ahead and find another job? But believe it or not, there are other companies hiring out there. So Amazon is one of them, Walmart, they're competing head to head and they're hiring big time. And there are so many other agencies out there that are actually looking to bring more people into their workforce. And if you're wondering which ones, don't worry, I'm actually going to leave the link down here below so you can actually check it out yourself and see if your expertise can be applicable to some of those companies that are looking to hire even during this crisis. Now, back to the board. Another way your tenant could find a solution is to simply, filing their taxes, right? If you are actually one of those taxpayers who are expecting a refund or anticipating a refund, then this is with more of a reasons to actually go ahead and try to file your taxes so that refund can help you either take care of some of your personal expenses, take care of some of the rent, and help you a little bit with that financial situation. Another solution that you can actually propose your tenant is to look for the stimulus that it's been approved by the CARES Act, right? Now, I will do another episode on the CARES Act. This is actually something that I'm doing a little bit more research on. I am actually reading the act myself and it's 335 pages long. But I promise that as soon as I'm done reading it and hopefully interpreting it correctly, I will create an episode to sort of like give you more guidance as to what to expect as a employee and what the CARES Act can do for you to help you in this difficult financial situation. And if you are a small business or a real estate investor who's running your rental portfolio as a business, then this CARES Act could actually be very beneficial for you as well. Another solution you can actually share with your tenant, and I know this one will actually sound very contradictory, is the use of credit cards, right? You might probably wondering, okay, well, why do I want to encourage my tenant to get into more debt, right? Once again, take a step back, right? Credit is not a way for you to getting yourself into debt. Credit is actually a tool that's going to help you get from point A to point B. In this case, you're very fortunate if your tenant happens to have some funds saved for a rainy day. But let's say an emergency happened and those funds are drying up because maybe a member of their family is getting sick and they need treatment because of the virus. And now this person is trying to find ways to just simply meet month's end. By having access to a credit card, you can actually have access to cash. You can use services like plastic or Venmo to actually pay for your rent and therefore get access to that capital. I actually did it when I was in college. The way I actually put myself through college was by having multiple credit cards that will help me pay my tuition one semester in advance, and then I will work multiple jobs to pay that car off. And then once that next semester comes, my car will hopefully be at zero, and then I will just swipe the car again and be able to pay my tuition. So it's exactly the same way here. And it's not just that. A lot of people are actually hoarding cash because they are afraid that eventually the banking system is going to go down, that credit card companies are not going to be working anymore. So they want to actually keep more cash in hand, and therefore they're using credit cards even more often than before. So that's definitely an option that they can do and that you can actually propose your tenant. But in real life, sometimes this cannot take place, right? Let's say that your tenants absolutely cannot afford to pay the rent, and you have to take action in order to protect your investment, right? Because you cannot afford to default on that mortgage, you cannot afford to default on those property taxes. And I just realized that I ran out of space, so let me go ahead and make some space. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, make sure you go ahead and do that so you can get access to information of this kind. And do not forget to hit the like button right here so you can help this episode rank and help other people looking for information of this kind. Okay, so we got some space back. Now, the next step I actually thought about how to protect my investment is to look into reserve funds, right? If you have no idea of what those reserve funds are, just think of it this way. Every time you have closed on a property, what are some of the requirements that you get from the bank? That you have at least somewhere between 3 to 6 months worth of funds, right? Depending on the bank. So let's say, for example, your mortgage payment will be $1,500, and I'm just throwing a number out there. Depending on the banks, lenders require you to have somewhere between 3 times or 6 times that mortgage payment. So we're talking about $45, $100, or potentially $9,000. So this is something that kind of like stuck with me every single time that I did a closing, because it was an actual requirement, and I sort of like never step away from that practice because I understood that emergencies can happen. Yes, you have insurance, but it's nice to have options, right? So I always make sure I have some extra funds, and I basically just review what I had in my portfolio in each of the bank accounts or each of my properties and see how much of funding can I have available in the event that either one of my tenants will actually lose their job and would not be able to meet their financial responsibility. So you can definitely check into your resources and see how much you have in your account, so that way you can start shuffling funds to cover one property versus another. The next option I consider, which I briefly talked about before, was just simply the use of credit cards, right? And once again, I know it sounds counterintuitive because you're probably wondering, why am I getting myself into debt? But I'm talking about, in this case, about business credit cards, right? Business credit cards, they stay separate from your personal credit card, and I managed to have a couple of credit cards available due to the different number of LLCs that I have. So in the event that something were to happen, I could actually tap into those funds and then use that to pay either my property taxes or my property manager, or just simply use services like Plastic or Venmo to get some of the cash available and use that to cover some of my mortgage expenses. And then another one that I looked into was actually having the possibility to tap into my 401k funds, right? So for those who don't know what a 401k is, it's just basically a retirement plan, and is usually made available if you are working for somebody, right? So your employer usually helps you to contribute towards your retirement funds. Typically, you're not allowed to access these funds before the age of retirement, but thanks to the CARES Act, now they're actually allowing people to tap into these funds and have the ability to withdraw them without having to pay the 10% penalty. Or you can do as I would normally do, which is to borrow against my 401k. Now, I know some of you might disagree with me. Why are you tapping into retirement funds? Because that is for your retirement, but this is an emergency, right? So the purpose of this episode is just to simply walk you through the multiple options that you have. You don't necessarily have to agree with each and one of them, but my goal here is to present you with different options and see which ones are actually available for you and which ones you can actually choose from in order to protect your investment and hopefully prevent a foreclosure due to the lack of rental income. And the last one right here, and this was approved recently, is the use of SBA loans, right? So remember how I said over and over again that real estate should be managed as a business? You should manage your real estate portfolio as if it is a business, right? That means placing your properties inside an LLC, making sure you're keeping tab of the operating costs, keeping up your receipts, making sure you're working with a accountant, a professional accountant that's going to help you keep everything in check. In fact, I actually recently got an email from the state of Alabama urging me to actually take advantage of the SBA loans that have been recently approved thanks to the CARES Act, right? And one more time, I will create an episode sometime next week because again, the CARES Act is 335 pages long. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and take a look at it and make sure I gather enough information so I can actually share that with you and see how you can actually get access to this help, how you can actually apply for it. So you can actually get access to those funds and hopefully help you take care of your investment portfolio. So that's all I have for you today. And while I have you here, make sure you check out this episode right here. That's gonna help you complement everything you just learned about today. And without further ado, I'll see you guys soon and take care. Bye-bye.